This trip down memory lane is brought to you by our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. Did you know that you've been able to enjoy all of our free content mainly because of our patrons? Well, it's true. Why not pay it forward to other Gettys nerds, new and old, by joining our Patreon page? So go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg, and we thank you in advance. Now, on to the show.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Addressing Gettysburg, Ask a Gettysburg Guide. We're talking about Evergreen Cemetery today. And a lot of people had some pretty good questions about this. It's not something that has come up. I don't think it's really ever come up before on the show. And so we said we need to do something about the cemetery. And who better to get than Deb Novotny? Everybody said, you got to get Deb Novotny. Everybody said that. And so we finally did. We got Deb Novotny. Deb, welcome to Addressing Gettysburg.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much for coming on. So this is your first time on the show. So we always start off with a little biographical information when it's somebody's first time. You're a licensed battlefield guide. How long have you been one? What made you become one? Let's hear it.
Well, March 15th this year, I had my 46th anniversary of passing the oral test.
Wow, congratulations.
I was very young when I started.
You're like a teenager, right?
Well, a little bit of... I was one of the younger guides when I started, and there were 3 other women already on the force. Mm-hmm. So I was number 4. And those 3 are gone now. They've died. So I'm holding the fort for the women guides at Gettysburg.
Now, were those the first 3 in history?
Yes.
Or they were?
Yes.
Okay, so you're the 4th in history.
4th in history.
Okay.
They wouldn't let women take the test. The park, I don't know, they just didn't. From 1915 until 1968. So in 68, Barb Shutt took the test. She insisted on being able to take the test, and she passed.
Good.
And she guided till, I think, the late 80s.
Okay.
And so
she opened the door.
She opened the door. Or what did they say about the ceiling?
Yeah.
But there have been 51, I think right now, 51 women guides since 1915.
That's pretty cool.
So we have 17 now.
Yeah, right. So there's currently 17 female guides.
17 out of 143 total.
Okay. All right. And would you recommend to anyone taking who is interested in taking the guide exam?
Definitely.
Yeah.
But it's the toughest test I ever took in my life.
Really?
Now, they change it all the time.
Right.
But they've gone back recently, the last couple of times, to the kind that I had to take, which was essay questions. But I had 200 fill-in-the-blank questions.
Wow.
You didn't have guessing. You didn't guess.
It was a multiple guess.
No. And either you knew it or you didn't know it. And I did have that famous question on mine about the serial number on the cannon that opened the battle on the Union
233.
side. That's right.
All right.
You're pretty good.
Yeah.
I guess the question got out.
No, my goal, I just find, I don't know why I became fascinated with it. My goal is to find where, if they're in existence, where 232 and 234 are. You know, if they're somewhere else or maybe even here. Do we know? Has anybody ever done that?
There have been a couple of studies.
Okay.
We have one in our guide library. Fred Hawthorne made one.
Sure.
And, you know, some of the cannon aren't on the battlefield.
Right.
Well, some are out for restoration, but I'm talking about one was moved to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, because it was marked Murfreesboro.
Okay.
And so I guess the park said, you should have it. It must have been there if it was marked.
Okay. Makes sense.
But anyway, yeah, I don't know where, I don't know the numbers. I know 233.
Yeah.
That's enough. But it was a tough test. But I tell you what, it is one of the greatest self-employment, especially if, you know, you're retired from another job.
Yeah. What did you do anything else since you got the test or since you got the license, or like what were you doing at the time?
I graduated from California State College in Western PA. That's where I hail from. In 1972. So I took the written test in 72.
Oh, all right.
But I really wanted to teach American history at Gettysburg High School to juniors.
So you were a history major?
I was a history major, and I got a job in Western Pennsylvania, but I wasn't happy. I had to be here. So I quit,
know the feeling.
I quit that job and moved here in 78. And so I was a full-time guide for a year. But I was a part-time before that.
Okay.
So I got the job that I wanted in 1980 at Gettysburg High School. Loved that job. But I retired in 2008. So I don't give a test anymore at the end of my tours. I tell people that. If they know I'm a teacher, sometimes it comes out.
Right.
No more tests.
You're done with the tests.
Right.
So what drew you to Evergreen Cemetery?
Oh, that's a good question. The first time that I walked in Evergreen Cemetery, this is the story. When I first moved here, the hospital, now Gettysburg Hospital, was called Annie M. Warner Hospital, and I wondered who she was. Why is this hospital named for a woman? So they said, wow, you got to go see Colonel Sheeds. He was a legend.
Yeah.
You know, he was an American history teacher at the Gettysburg High School, too. So I found, he lived on Stratton Street. And I knocked on the door, and I said, who's Annie M. Warner? And he sat me down, and he told me all about her, that she went down to Camp Colt during the Spanish flu and helped the soldiers that were there that had the flu.
Okay.
And her husband donated the land where the hospital is. He owned a lot of land there. And he said, I'm going to name it in her memory if she dies, and I'm going to name it in her honor if she doesn't get the flu and die, if she lives. So I'm waiting for Colonel Sheeds to tell me, did she die or, He's not telling me. I said, are you going to tell me? And he said, go down to Evergreen Cemetery. And go along the fence that separates the two cemeteries, the National and the Evergreen, and keep walking until you see a crossed tombstone. And that's how I got in Evergreen Cemetery.
So it was the story of an individual who's buried there that you were interested in, and then that made that connection.
That's right.
I love to go through Evergreen Cemetery and look at all the names I recognize from reading books about the battle. You know, all the famous townspeople's names that you just know them because they were mentioned in the battle story for one reason or another, and I'm like, wow, that's where they are. That's like to me, that's an even closer connection to the event than walking on the battlefield, if that makes any sense.
It does.
Okay.
Because these people had to put up with this battle. A lot of them are buried, farmers. The farmers' names, Trossel, you see Trossel.
Right.
And they're in there.
Yeah. It makes them real. For some reason, more than the monuments do on the battlefield. The standing on someone's grave and seeing that name that you've read so many times in your life, and then like that person is right below, well, whatever's left of them is right below me, and that's my connection to these historical figures. It is a fascinating thing to do. I love to do it. Eric and I have gone walking through there sometime. We're like, oh look, there's so and so, and oh, there's so and so, and it's just a cool thing to do. And it's a cool little cemetery up on a hilltop and everything. Before we get into the background of it here, I just want to remind the audience to not forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and make sure that you have all of the notifications turned on so that when we go live, you'll know about it. Also, if you use the Apple Podcast app, please leave a 5-star review. Reviews, liking, sharing, subscribing are the best ways to help us grow our audience. And that is that. Now let's get into the history of the cemetery. It predates the battle. It's not. It doesn't spring up from the battle, right?
That's right.
All right. So how does it start? Why do they choose that beautiful hill?
The town had church cemeteries connected with the church.
Sure.
And they were filling up. And the garden cemetery movement started in the 1830s up in Cambridge, Mount Auburn Cemetery. And some others like Laurel Hill Cemetery where Meade is buried. These garden cemeteries.
Garden cemetery meaning that it's not a churchyard. It's this separate place that's beautified and all that.
With trees and shrubbery and pathways. So
kind of laid out.
Like a park.
Yeah, like a park. Yeah.
So some of the leaders in Gettysburg decided to establish it's a private cemetery, but non-denominational, in 1853, and it was actually, I guess, opened for burials in 1854. So let's say it's 9 years old at the time of the battle. There are some tombstones in the cemetery that predate 1854 because a lot of these church cemeteries closed and they moved the remains and the tombstones to Evergreen.
Okay.
There's some pretty big sections. There's Methodist and Lutheran sections in there.
Okay, so in other words, the tombstone may say 17-something, but that's just transferred from an old churchyard to Evergreen. Okay, all right. So, because I've seen some of those older ones, and I always assumed it's been there since the colonial days, but
like the slate ones.
Yes,
some of them are really intricate. You know, they have coat of arms carved in.
Oh, I know, they're fascinating. That's the other thing I like, besides just seeing the names I recognize, is the old style of tombstones, because those were done by hand. Like today it's all machines, so it's not as impressive if they're really ornate, but back then, like, that was done by hand. And the things that they say on them, I mean, it's this whole like story about someone sometimes, you know. It's not just the person's name, birth and death year. So, okay, so continue. I'm sorry.
So probably, and I got this from Art Kennel. He gave walks of the cemetery. He was the superintendent. Back when I was really getting into learning who was in there. He said that there were 215 tombstones in the cemetery at the time of the battle.
Okay.
But probably there were closer to 500 lots sold and burials.
Okay.
Some people just didn't have the money to put up a stone.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So is that why, like, when I'm coming up the Baltimore Pike, and there's that slope that I guess that would be like the southwestern slope of the hill that you can see there, where a lot of the modern graves are. It seems to be that there's blank sections, but then. And it's right off the road, but there are tombstones, but then there's a couple of rows worth of open ground, and then there's more tombstones. Is that because there might actually be people there?
Could be some, but some of the ones from the I think it's the Methodist section. That's the part that you can see when you go in the lower end.
Okay, yeah.
Entrance. They're flat.
Yeah.
So they're flat, so you really can't see them if you're just going on the road. But if you walk in there, they didn't upright them. They probably were upright where they were first buried.
Right.
But they just put them flat, and they're very close to each other, too.
Yeah.
That could be what you're seeing.
Okay.
But there are some in there that I think should have tombstones, but they don't.
But they don't. Well, there was that one, and I know I'm skipping around in the timeline here, but there was that one boy who died. Oh, I forget his name, and he just got a tombstone. I think it was last year. What was his name?
Alan Fraser.
Yes. And he's been buried there since
1863.
Yeah, and he only now got a tombstone because of I think it was the Civil War Roundtable, right?
Right.
So they got up the money and put that together, which was a nice thing to do. But all that time, he's had nothing to mark that he ever existed.
That's right.
That's sad.
It is.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I keep pulling you out of the story.
That's okay. So the cemetery, of course, became very famous after the battle because it was part of the Union battle line. Cemetery Hill, very important part of the Union battle line. So it started filling up. You know, a lot of people. And there's one that you should note, that James Geddes, the founder of Gettysburg, was 50 years. He was buried in Black Cemetery, which is out on the Belmont Road off Chambersburg Pike.
Yeah.
And his son, who had moved to Tennessee, moved him and put that stone that's there now. He died in 1815, and he was moved in 1865.
James Geddes.
James Geddes and his mother.
So he died in 1815, and he was buried out at Black Cemetery on the Belmont Road. And for those of you who are wondering where that is, if you go out the Chambersburg Pike west, like you're going to Cashtown, or out to the first shot marker, Belmont Road is right before the first shot marker. I don't know, maybe I don't know how maybe a quarter of a mile or something like that. And that goes roughly north and south. Black Cemetery, was that a church?
Yeah, that was a Presbyterian.
Okay. So there was a church out there, wasn't there? Or was it? Because I remember I was looking at it on an old map, and it seemed to be like it was just a cemetery in the middle of nowhere, right?
It is. It's like out in the country.
Yeah. Still is.
Could have been. I'm not positive.
Okay. But it was affiliated with a church, whether the church was there or not. Okay. So that's interesting. So he was buried way out of the town that he founded, and then finally his son brought him back into essentially the heart of the town.
Right.
Okay. That's pretty interesting.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. And he has a very nice tombstone. It's more of a monument than a tombstone.
But he's missing his dog.
What's that? What do you mean?
There's a greyhound dog, cast iron, right in front. There's the pad where it was. It was stolen.
Oh, really?
So we're always kicking around the idea to maybe raise some money and get that recast somewhere and put it back.
You should. We should do that. Yeah. We can do that, and then I'm sure the people listening to the show would contribute to that because they're pretty generous.
There's a lot of greyhounds that come to Gettysburg every year.
Those are the people you need to get in with.
I know.
Yeah, you just convince them it's a greyhound monument.
It is.
Yeah, well, it is. I know, but make it seem like it's bigger than it was his pet. So he had a pet greyhound.
He always had dogs.
Okay.
He liked dogs, and the most famous thing is he had a collar, and there was a medallion that James Geddes had put on it, and it said, "I'm James Geddes' dog. Whose dog are you?" So that tells me that founder of Gettysburg had a sense of humor.
Yeah. It's like, I'm Bart Simpson. Who the hell are you?
Right.
Well, it's like that Jones headstone that's over there. It's, like God works through imbeciles, and I was living proof of that. That's hilarious. I couldn't believe it the first time I saw that.
I love that one. That's my favorite one. What's the story with? Do you know who that is?
No, I don't know. I've seen it, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's looks like a more modern. When did he die?
I don't know. I haven't actually walked up and looked at because it's like a family headstone, but then there's smaller individual ones that are flat that you can't read from inside the National Cemetery, and I've just never bothered to go over and look to see who it was.
Right.
Next time I go walking around, I'll check.
Right. So then through the years, the cemetery kept growing. It started out around 17 acres, which is the same size that the National Cemetery started out. And then more land was purchased by the Evergreen Cemetery Board. And that's that more modern section, that you're talking about. It's down near the,
down at the bottom of the
Comfort, the motel.
Right.
And it's still active. You can still buy lots there. And this is becoming more and more popular. People get cremated. We probably have enough room in there for 100 more years.
If people get cremated.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it's maybe not quite that long, because it takes bigger space for a whole full burial.
Right.
And I'm saying we because I'm back on the board.
Oh, okay. Nice.
Barbara Finfrock and I got on the board in 1999, the first women since 1854 to become trustees of this board that runs the cemetery. And there's a term limit, 6 years, so then you have to get off a year. And I've done that since 1999. So
you keep going back and forth?
Back, yeah.
All right, nice.
They kicked me off, and then they said, "Do you want to come back?" I said, "Well, sure I do." I love that cemetery.
Sure.
And, of course, you have to be a lot owner to be on the board.
Okay.
So I've got my spot, but it's not marked yet.
I've been thinking of, they've got to be expensive, right? I mean, that seems like prime real estate.
If you're a veteran, that would be the lowest price, and it's around a little over $1,500 for a lot. If you're not a veteran, it goes up, So
yeah.
I think the highest maybe is around $3,000 if you're cremated.
Oh, that's the highest?
Because you can put a lot more, cremains, because it's the size of a lot, but you could put I don't know how many. So I think $3,000.
Well, that's actually not as bad as I thought it was. I thought the low end would be 3,000. That's what I was assuming in my head. So, all right.
And the neat thing about it is we put more money into perpetual care than the state requires.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would imagine being Evergreen Cemetery, where it is, it's a little bit more, I hate to say it like this, but it's a little bit more important than your run-of-the-mill cemetery somewhere else, because the eyes of the nation are upon you.
That's right. That's right. But I think we're very competitive with, we know what the other cemeteries, like one in Hanover, Mount Olivet, and so we don't compare ourselves to like a modern cemetery.
No.
We're historic,
right?
But I think it's well kept too.
It's beautiful. I love it. It's a weird thing. I don't know why I like to just take a stroll through there sometimes, because it's or any cemetery really, but that one in particular. And I guess it's just because we're all going to end up in one someday or another, or in some way or another. I guess I should say, whether it's fully in a casket or cremated or whatever, and. I don't know. It's nice to see the living still, taking care of it and protecting it, and kind of just makes you feel a little secure. But that doesn't mean if another civil war breaks out and a battle rages around it that it's going to be safe, kind of like we learned in the first one, right? Mm-hmm. So what happened during the Battle of Gettysburg to the cemetery? I've heard stories of what are they called? Tombstones being shattered and men having to worry about those. And what happened?
It was a Union artillery position, being a hill, so there were batteries. There's 4 cannon along the Baltimore Pike. Mm-hmm. I think they were more into the cemetery itself. So there were a few tombstones in there that were white obelisks. So the Union soldiers dismantled them, put them down because they would be something you could bead,
Yeah.
So the McPherson, for example, his family stone, and the Schmeisers. So they had to. But I wondered, before they left, did they put them back up, or did they?
I doubt it.
I doubt it too. But since it was an artillery position, incoming artillery shells hit some of the stones. Mm. And there are 3 stones that I know of that still show the damage. Mm-hmm. Because the tombstones are actually owned by the lot holder,
right.
Whoever bought the lot. So they're family stones. The cemetery doesn't own them. So if the family had the wherewithal, they would replace them. But there's 3. And one of them is the father of those Culp brothers. One fought for the blue and one fought for the gray. Mm-hmm. His stone has a little metal tablet on it saying that artillery fired, during the battle caused that damage.
I think I've seen that one. So is that the way it is today? If there was for some reason a artillery shell came flying into the cemetery today and it was damaged, it's on the family to replace it?
Now, some of the families don't live here anymore.
Right.
And so sometimes the cemetery, like for the Fraser Stone, will conduct something, donations, or try to get them.
Try to get in touch with them if they're around.
There's nobody to get in touch with. And the cemetery is, I don't know if you noticed, but some of these white marble stones have this black stuff on them.
Yeah, like a mold.
Yeah, mold or lichen or something. And the cemetery is periodically cleaning with this special stuff. Yeah. You paint it on, you wait a while, you paint it on again. It kills that stuff. Pretty expensive stuff. But they're doing that. And every year they try to do more and more if the finances are there.
Those white marble ones too seem to wear away.
Yeah.
And do they? I mean, I take, because a lot of them are really old, so I take it that the cemetery doesn't replace those.
Yeah.
Does the cemetery keep a record of what they once said, so that if someone wanted to know, they could go and look it up? And
I think that Colonel Sheeds I was talking about he always had his students going out on the battlefield looking for things. And like instead of doing a term paper, you could go to one of these old cemeteries in the county and record the epitaphs of what was on the stone before they couldn't be read anymore. And I think those papers, that research is in the Adams County Historical Society.
Oh, good. Okay, so it is somewhere.
I think.
Okay.
I don't know if all of them were done.
Sure.
But some of them are recorded.
Does the cemetery have a map with who's in what plot?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It's digitized. I mean, it's computerized.
Is it online or?
The map isn't, but here it is. That's kind of small print there, but.
Oh my Lord! It is.
I have that because I'm in charge of the committee that puts the flags out for Memorial Day for the old section. Mm-hmm. And so all those little marked, those are over 300 veterans from the Revolution, actually French and Indian War, to the Spanish-American.
You know, when you look at it on a map like this, it's a lot bigger than you think.
There's a lot. That's the old section. That's not the new.
This is just the new or the old section, right. You say?
Because I don't do any of the flags in the new section.
Where's the entrance? Over here or over here?
It's over on your right.
This one here.
Right side.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now, when you first go in, is that the original section of the cemetery?
Yeah, that's the oldest part.
Okay.
Right inside the gatehouse you're talking.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Wow.
And the oldest grave is there,
Who is the oldest grave?
Her name was Mary Beitler. And actually, I think she got in a week before the lots were publicly sold. I don't know. She died around Halloween. And I think it was first week of November when they started selling the lots.
Okay.
So she had died, and her husband wanted her there.
And that was what year?
1854.
54, right. Okay. Okay, so I originally asked you about the cemetery during the battle, and then we got off on a tangent. So let's go back to the battle. So during the battle, go ahead.
So during the battle, some of they used to have iron fences around. You were allowed to put an iron fence around your plot.
Right, yeah.
And up until 1907, I think it was, you had to buy 5 plots. You couldn't just buy a single or a double.
Okay.
So 5. So they had fences around, a pretty big section if it's 5 plots. Some of those were damaged. There's a few accounts, not too many, that talks about, graves kind of messed up. And once again, it was up to the families if they wanted to repair all that. But for being an artillery position, I don't think it was damaged all that much, like you would think.
Right.
And it's mainly because most of the shells coming in came from Benner's Hill, that's out the Hanover Road, and that was a little far, for artillery, for the Southern artillery.
Right. So, in other words, they were falling short of the cemetery.
Well, they were trying to hit the cannon on East Cemetery Hill, too.
Right.
Rather than Taft's Battery. There's 2 cannon right inside the gatehouse, and then there's 4 along the Baltimore Pike. That's 1 battery, Taft's Battery, 20-pounder Parrots. So I don't know. There were cannon over in what's now the National Cemetery,
right?
Too. We think of them as 2 separate areas, but that was just a hill. Well,
and that's so. Let's talk about that. So what now is the National Cemetery was farmland.
Right, it was a cornfield and an apple orchard, I think some wheat.
Wheat, yeah.
Maybe it was over there too. But it was, pretty good artillery position. There were quite a number of batteries over there. And also,
from the National Cemetery, you're facing roughly north or northerly directions, and the town, nothing the way it looks today was the way it looked then. So those big pine trees weren't there. No. The wall wasn't there. A lot of those buildings weren't there. So it was this wide open. Right. And you really, unless you accidentally catch a glimpse between 2 pine trees or something, you really don't get what a great position that was because your view is blocked. But that wasn't the case during the battle.
It was all open.
So you've got this like 360-degree view of everything from that hill.
Right.
That's why it was so valuable. So now the Howard, though, he makes his headquarters in the gatehouse? Or near the gatehouse?
It's marked on East Cemetery Hill, but was he actually in there? You know, the Thorne family was there the 1st of July. And then General Howard told Elizabeth Thorne, you better take your family out. So she left with her 3 boys and her parents. They were in their 60s. And they went down the Baltimore Pike some distance. So the house was abandoned. And there is a story that the clock was taken out of the house and put on the north inner part of the archway. It was stuck up on, so I guess I could see what time it was.
Okay.
And that clock was donated by the Thornes to Evergreen. And it is now on temporary display over at the Gettysburg Heritage Center on Steinway Avenue.
All right.
They have a little display for Evergreen in there.
Oh, that's neat. Let's talk about Elizabeth Thorne real quick.
Okay.
Who was she and why is she so special?
Well, she was German-born in what's now Germany, came to the United States, and met Peter Thorne. Her name was Mauser. Met him, and they got married in 1855. This is kind of funny. They were married in Christ Lutheran Church on Chambersburg Street, September 1st, 1855.
Okay.
1855. And he had no job yet. He became the first caretaker of Evergreen, but he doesn't have that job yet. And they came out of the church after they were married, and all the bells were ringing in the churches in town. And Mrs. Elizabeth Thorne now looked at her husband and said, "They're celebrating our wedding day." Well, not exactly. Yeah, because the whole town didn't do that. What were they celebrating? Do you know?
No.
Laying the cornerstone and actually dedicating the gatehouse for the Evergreen Cemetery that they will be living in some months later.
Interesting. Okay.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So Peter Thorne in 1862 decided to enlist. He didn't go in the first wave of, he had a family, but he did go in 1862. He joined the 138th Pennsylvania.
Okay.
They did not fight in the Battle of Gettysburg, by the way. I think they were down on Harper's Ferry, or they were not here.
Elsewhere.
They were elsewhere. So, but he was paid $150 a year, plus you got free board, free
room
rent.
and board. Yeah, right.
And they had to buy their own food.
For sure.
They free rent in the gatehouse.
Yeah.
It had 6 rooms, the gatehouse. So anyway, Mrs. Thorne had to take care of the cemetery while her husband went to war.
Right.
To keep getting that $150.
Sure. It's not.
So I asked about how many would she be burying a month. Gettysburg only had 2,400 people in the 1860 census. And the answer was about 5 graves a month. And then, of course, the battle occurred. And a lot of relatives didn't want their loved ones buried in fields, farmers' fields, and they came and they bought lots in Evergreen Cemetery. $2.50 a lot, by the way.
Okay.
Too bad you weren't around that.
Yeah, really.
And so she wrote her reminiscence later. And she said that she buried 105, July and August, 1863.
Okay.
With her husband off at war, she had to do it. But her father, 65-year-old, what could he do? That's pretty old for that time period. But he tried to help. And she was 6 months pregnant when she started doing this digging by hand, pick and shovel.
Yeah, no backhoes back then.
No backhoes. And where they chose the place, and you can see these stones in rows from the Baltimore Pike.
Yep.
Somebody wanted to know exactly how to get there, and I can talk about that when we get that question.
Sure.
But I lost my thought.
She and her father-in-law or father were.
Yeah, she put out she sent telegrams to friends. Would you come and help me? And 2 friends showed up. one lasted 2 days, and then he got deathly sick because these bodies had been buried in the dirt, and were decaying. No embalming, was done. They were just wrapped in a blanket, maybe in their first grave on the battlefield. So he left after 2 days, and the other friend stayed 5 days. And Mrs. Thorne said that she had to pay their fare to come to Gettysburg, plus their daily wage.
Oh, wow.
And then, of course, she had to continue the work herself. Good thing her mother was around to take care of those 3 boys because they were young.
Yeah.
One was 7, one was 5, and one was 2.
And she has another one on the way.
And she has another one on the way.
And she's digging.
And she's digging.
So how many graves in all did she dig?
Well, she said she buried 105. And I'm thinking, because the other number that you hear is 91.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I'm thinking, is she counting the Gettysburg people that died too? 5 a month, so that's like 10 more.
Okay.
So if you add 91 and 10, you get 101. That's closer to that 105.
Sure. Okay.
But, well, she's just one of the many courageous women that are involved in the aftermath. Besides dead horses she had to deal with that were artillery horses.
Sure.
Like 17 she had to get rid of.
How many men after the battle were burying dead soldiers?
Well, there was, before the Union Army departed, before the Army of the Potomac departed after the battle, so we're talking only a couple days, they were doing some of the digging.
Sure.
Just very shallow.
I mean Gettysburg civilian.
Oh, Gettysburg civilians?
Yeah. I mean, I know, was it Basil Biggs was hired to later.
Oh, I see what you're asking.
Yeah.
Transporting them. Biggs had a pretty big wagon, and he could take 9 coffins at a time, go out to the original grave, put them in, bring them in. Somebody else dug the graves in the National Cemetery.
Right.
I know that one of the other young boys was in on that, too. And he said, we could only take 6. He could take 9. And you got 10 cents for each one you transported.
Uh-huh.
That was part of that $1.69 a body.
Yeah.
Something like that. That was the bid.
Yeah, right.
Trying to bury somebody for that now. So, I don't know. I never read how many altogether, but Biggs did the great majority of them.
Right.
We know he went to Hanover, Battle of Hanover, cavalry action, because there's a picture of him and Samuel Weaver there.
Oh, he went over there and got some of the dead that were over there?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Okay. And brought them here.
And brought them to the National Cemetery.
Okay. But that's the National Cemetery. We're talking about Evergreen.
Right. Evergreen, it was all on Elizabeth and her father.
So, and then the couple of friends that came and helped for as long as they could.
But she was working the rest of July, so that's 3 months. The National Cemetery, they didn't start reburying there until late October. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of relatives that came July and August, I'm thinking, maybe even into September. I know that Elizabeth Thorne said that she lived in the same dress for 6 weeks. Because all her clothes had been taken for bandages that were in the house.
Wow.
And bed linens. And she lived in a tent. They put up an army tent for her and her family.
So she's wearing the same clothes that she's burying.
Yes.
Ugh. Because these are not freshly dead people. These have been out in the elements for a few days.
That's right.
Oh, my God.
It's a very rocky part of the cemetery she had to deal with, too.
Yeah.
So it's not just digging the dirt. It's moving. It's very rocky.
And she's pregnant. Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
Now, the baby was born November 1st and was a sickly child, Mrs. Thorne said. And she was dead before she was 15 years old. And even Elizabeth Thorne was very sickly after this whole thing.
Uh-huh. Okay. How long did she survive afterwards?
She died in 1907.
Oh, she had a pretty good run.
And
how about her husband?
More kids. He made it through the war.
Okay.
He came back, and he was the caretaker again of the cemetery until he retired. I think it was 1874.
And you said they had more kids after the war?
Yeah.
So how many in total?
I think there were 8.
Wow.
So it's 4, counting the little one she was carrying, and then 4 after. She was like 48 or 49 when she had her last child.
Really?
I think she was 30 at the time she's doing all this digging.
Jeez. Well, she definitely deserves a statue.
Well, somebody asked, what did the townspeople think of her?
Yeah.
And did they know what she was doing? And, I think it goes back to she was German. She's a hard worker, And I never read, I've read a lot of civilian accounts, citizens of the town accounts, and I don't think I've read any that mentioned Elizabeth Thorne or that the townspeople would go up there and try to help her deal with all this. Now, one lady did help with the bed. The beds were soaked with blood. So this other lady came and helped her, wash the beds so they could
sleep in them. Yeah. Well, you're an outsider. You're not from here, and I mean, she's an outsider too. She's a German, and sometimes it takes a lot to endear yourself to the community. Sometimes around here, sometimes it takes people an entire lifetime, and they never do it.
Right.
So it is a tough nut to crack. And but I mean, going through all of that, you would think.
Yeah.
I gotta tip my hat to her.
She was tough.
So how about Confederate dead? I know this isn't necessarily related to Evergreen Cemetery, but the Confederate dead, after the battle, they're left there in the ground. They're not exhumed and moved over to the National Cemetery. When their families come and recover them years later, how the hell do they do it? Like, what could be left? And
well, most of them, over 3,000. Some Southern ladies organized these groups called the Ladies Memorial Associations in the big cities like Richmond and Raleigh and Savannah and Charleston. And they wanted Samuel Weaver, who had moved the Union dead. He was in charge of superintending the Union dead within a year after the battle. They wanted him to do it for the Confederates. The war's over. They didn't want him up here in these shallow trenches. So Samuel Weaver, I think, was going to do it, and then he died from a railroad accident. Yeah, it was bad. And he's buried in Evergreen Cemetery.
Okay.
So sometimes when I do my walks, I'll stop at his grave. But his son was a doctor in Philadelphia, and his son, Rufus Weaver, decided he would do it for those ladies. So he worked from 1871 to 1873. I think it was 2 years. And, of course, they're not identifiable. And if a friend buried a friend and did take a piece of board and put the name on it, could it be read? We're talking 8 to 10 years after
right.
the battle. So
if it's still there.
If the marker was still there, you're right. So when they shipped them to those cities, the Georgians went to Savannah, Laurel Grove Cemetery, and the South Carolinians to Magnolia in Charleston and Oakwood in Raleigh. But the great majority of them, I think about 2,900 maybe, were sent to Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond. And one big section of Hollywood, they don't know where they're buried, but they're there somewhere.
They don't know who's in there.
They don't.
It's a mass grave, right?
No, yeah, it's a kind of a mass grave.
Yeah.
But the last time I went down, there actually are these government headstones with names on them.
So maybe some guys were easily recovered.
I don't think they were right there. They know who's probably there.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
They're cenotaphs.
Okay, I gotcha. So it's not that the guy's right there, right under it. It's in this area.
Right.
Possibly are the bones.
But, for example, Louis Armistead, his friends from Baltimore had him dug up before the war was over and moved him to Episcopal Cemetery in Baltimore.
Okay. Anything else that you want the audience to know about Evergreen Cemetery before we go to the break and come back and take their questions?
I think we're going to hit some of these very good questions, and I'll wait.
Okay.
I don't think I have anything more.
All right, that sounds good. So what we'll do, ladies and gentlemen, is we'll take a little break. For those of you watching on Facebook Live, I'll have a little fife and drum music for you so you don't get all worried that there's no sound. And we will come back in a couple of minutes and take questions from our patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. And if everybody in the Facebook video behaves themselves, we might take some questions from you. So, no, I'm just kidding. Of course, we'll take some questions from you, so make them good, and we're going to have them a little bit later. Okay, so we'll take a break. Be right back. Okay. Hey, guess what? Guess what's back? Guess what's back, everybody? Anybody want to guess? How about in the back there? Mike, Debbie, anybody want to guess what's coming back?
No idea. What's coming back?
How about you guys in the back? 6 questions? Got a guess?
The show?
No. The show is back. What's coming back in February? Anybody have a guess?
Taco trivia.
Tacos and trivia at the Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, Saturday, February 15th. Bring your loving sweetheart out, 6 o'clock to 8:30 p.m. Join us for another lighthearted evening of family-friendly general trivia, but not about generals. Oh, for prizes, a taco bar will be provided by the Ragged Edge Catering. This evening is BYOB. The water, lemonade, and iced tea will be included, so bring your own booze. Registration is individual, but you may register up to 6 total people, which would be a full team at one time. Listen, last year we did this. Let's see, who was there? Mike was there, Debbie was there, right?
Yep.
Not Mikey B, though. Mikey B wasn't there. You're going to be there this time, Mikey, right?
Very possibly, maybe.
I think you should. You'll have fun. It was a lot of fun. Debbie was there. I'm sorry. Bethany was there. Cindy was there. Colby and Taylor were there. Veronica was there. Who else was there? Kath was there with Veronica. Trivia. What's that?
We were robbed.
We were robbed of a victory.
Yeah.
Because Taylor, I think it was Taylor, right? She, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, it was Taylor's fault. Okay, so what? It wasn't Taylor's fault?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, Taylor was right.
Was right.
Taylor was right.
And you
it
guys
was Colby's
had
fault.
Old.
Wrong.
No, we were
Old
right. You go by the questions.
From
it's our
the 1985 version of Trivial Pursuit.
So what you have to do is you've got to go to the Seminary Ridge Museum's website, which is seminaryridgemuseum.com. And sign up there. You could also call 717-339-1300 or email them info@seminaryridgemuseum.com. Listen, honestly, folks, it's a lot of fun. We have a great time. Bring whatever booze you want. Have fun with it. Enjoy yourself, because we're going to do the same thing. And let's see who wins. May the best team win. We'll see you in February. Don't forget, February 15th, tacos, trivia, and love.
You're listening to the Addressing Gettysburg podcast with Matt Callery.
All right, and we are back, and it's time to get on to the questions submitted by our patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. If you'd like to submit questions for our guides to answer and get exclusive content that takes a closer look at all things Gettysburg and Gettysburg related, please consider joining us on Patreon today. That's patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. We just launched a first lieutenant tier, which is the highest tier we have now, but you get video content along with everything else that lower ranks get. So be sure you go over there and help support the show and keep us going and growing. Okay. Deb, here we go with the questions. The first question comes from Joe Jacobs, and I often hear people ask guides this, or anybody who will talk to them, they'll ask this question. Do they ever plan to mark the spot where Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address?
That is a very good question. We don't know the exact spot. There are some theories. I mean, when I first started guiding in the mid-'70s, it was supposedly the Soldiers' National Monument in the National Cemetery. And even before that, there was one saying it was closer to the New York State Monument, but photographs were taken. And I think I have been convinced by Bill Frazanito, William Frazanito, who's the photography kind of expert here.
Sure.
And I see you have his book over here.
Yeah, we've got one of them.
In his second Gettysburg book, Early Photography at Gettysburg, he goes into the speaker's platform location.
Yeah.
And I've talked to him about it, too, that it most likely was in Evergreen Cemetery. You're going to have to look for the tombstones of Yount, Koch, and Kitzmiller. I measured it. It's 118 feet from the Soldiers' National Monument.
Okay.
So if you go to the Soldiers' National Monument and then you go toward the fence, the iron fence, and you look in, you'll see Yount is the easiest one because it's big letters, Y-O-U-N-T, that's most likely where it was, but we're not absolutely certain.
But would that be close to the, no, that wouldn't be close to the, because there's a photograph, like a wide photograph, and you can see the gatehouse, but it's in the background. It's in the distance, right?
Yes, left background.
So going from where you're saying today, roughly, that would be kind of where that circle is in the road at the top of the hill?
The Brown Mausoleum?
Yes.
The mausoleum in there?
Yes.
Well, that was called the Rocky Center.
Okay.
I told you that there was a lot of rocks in Evergreen, so they would dump, and I don't know in 1863 whether it was there, but there's a whole pile of them there by 1865.
Okay.
But nobody was buried in that section, and just think about it. They were just doing the National Cemetery. Maybe 1,000, a third of the 3,000 some were already buried. It was muddy. It was grassy. Mm-hmm. And they probably just asked the Evergreen president, can we use your spot? Because we're expecting a big crowd.
Right.
And that picture shows maybe upwards of 15,000. I've even heard more people were present on November 19th, 1863.
Wow.
Well, when I was on the board one of those years back, I brought up the question whether we should have like a little marker. Because there's a path going right to there. There's actually a gate that's kept padlocked in that fence. And that path goes right to it. And I thought, well, maybe we could put just a little stone with an arrow saying. It didn't go over well. I had to have 5 votes out of the 8. And I didn't. I mean, I couldn't get the... And I was wondering, what's wrong with marking it? This is a world history event.
Yeah, and people want to know.
Yeah. But it's owned. You got to remember, this is a private cemetery. The cemetery is owned by lot holders.
So you don't want people coming through.
Yeah.
You don't want a lot of people coming through.
They're already going to certain graves, like Jenny Wade, which is kind of like right along the road. So you got to respect that privacy, too.
Sure. Yeah, I understand that. It's not a national cemetery.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it is interesting to think about where that was. And it's funny how, you read the reactions of some of the people at the time, and, some people weren't impressed at all. They thought it was a terrible speech. And it's just like the world looks at that speech as one of the most perfect political speeches ever given. And we don't even know where it was delivered exactly.
It was no big deal.
Yeah, it wasn't a big deal at the time.
The important thing on that date were those graves of those soldiers who died.
Yeah.
So the speakers, Edward Everett or Abraham Lincoln, weren't not the people to be on the showcase.
Yeah. Okay, Martin Husk, he says, he's got 4 questions. Let's see, we might have covered some of these, so let's go through them here. Was there ever consideration given to incorporating Evergreen Cemetery, either all or part, into the National Cemetery?
Actually, it's just the reverse.
Oh.
The president of the cemetery, McConaughey, wanted... Actually, this goes back even pre-battle. 1862, about a year before, he wanted a section of Evergreen for Gettysburg locals.
Yeah.
And there were already 2 that had died.
But you mean Gettysburg local
Gettysburg
soldiers who died in the war? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And there were a couple that died from disease because the troops were stationed in Gettysburg.
Mm-hmm.
So they never did that. But then the battle happened, and McConaughey was thinking, well, we can have that section. There was a big fight between David McConaughey and David Wills.
Yeah.
You probably know a little bit about that. And Wills, who was a friend of the governor of Pennsylvania, Andrew Curtin, he won out, and he got private land that was purchased, not in Evergreen Cemetery, but next to it.
Right next to it. Mm-hmm. And so it is interesting that because you mentioned there were troops stationed in Gettysburg. Was that New York Cavalry?
Mm-hmm.
That was
10th in New York.
Yeah, and
was it cavalry or infantry?
I thought it was cavalry.
Yeah,
because didn't Jenny Wade and her friends go out and help them and feed them and dance with them?
Okay.
Yeah. I don't remember, but I think it was cavalry. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that, in a lot of people's minds, Gettysburg wasn't a thing to anybody until the battle happened, and the battle happened by accident. But there were troops here. Why were they here?
Well, 1859, the railroad, it was a spur line, but there was a railroad coming into Gettysburg from the east. They had 10 roads. 10 roads radiating out of the town, so it's a transportation hub. Some of the roads were better than other,
Right.
Some were very ruddy. But, and we're close to the Mason-Dixon line here. Mm-hmm. Maryland, was actually on both sides. They weren't neutral, So, and of course, Harrisburg, the capital, is only 35 miles north of Gettysburg. So that's probably why we had a contingent of some troops here.
So so there was like a defensive military purpose, even though Gettysburg wasn't a special military target, as they often try to point out, in setting up the battle. It's the same reasons for the battle, though: the roads, proximity to all these different places, and things like that. Okay. But it is interesting that McConaughey wanted to have a soldier section beforehand, and then the battle comes along, and finally that gets to happen, but not quite the way he had pictured. Okay, the second question he has is, were any Confederate soldiers ever buried in Evergreen, even temporarily?
Yes.
Okay.
This is 1866 at the Jacob Schwartz Farm, which is down the Baltimore Pike, off the Pike. Rock Creek was there. They had a hospital, Second Corps Hospital, your General Hancock's Corps. Mm-hmm. And this two graves were found there in 1866. So this man, Hiram Warren was his name, decided they should have a decent burial. Now, this is before the Confederates were moved out. Like I said, it was 1871 when that started happening as an organized effort. So he went to the board of Evergreen Cemetery and asked if they would allow them to be buried there. Mm-hmm. And Evergreen said yes. But instead of $2.50 a grave, it was $8 a grave because they were Confederates.
Okay.
So they were buried in Section E, Lot 169. Well, that was like in January, and then, I don't know, later in the year, 1866. The people found out about it. The people of Gettysburg, lot holders. They have a meeting every year of all the lot holders who want to come. It's in June. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you get 2 or 3 people coming. Like there were, 100 or something like that. And they complained.
Sure.
They complained. They don't want any, quote, rebels there. So David McConaughey and Peter Thorne in 1866 were told to move them to, like, someplace.
Anywhere.
Undisclosed. Beyond, or right at the edge of the cemetery. I guess it had to be on cemetery land.
Oh, but they were still allowed in the cemetery, just not near any of them.
But not marked.
Oh.
And so they did that. And supposedly they were the only 2 who knew where they were moved to. Okay?
Huh.
Yeah. So today, if you go to that section where the Union soldiers are buried, the ones that Elizabeth Thorne buried, the ones that weren't moved to the National. There are 2 cenotaphs to this Matthew Goodson. He was a sergeant in Pettigrew's brigade, hit on July 3rd, and he died, I don't know, about a week later or something like that. And then this Hooper Caffey from an Alabama O'Neill's brigade, he lasted until September, actually, before he died. So those are just cenotaphs.
Okay.
That were put up about 1990 by Art Kennel. He was a superintendent. He found relatives of them because they could apply for those Veterans Administration paid-for tombstones.
Right.
But that's not where they're buried.
That's not where they're... Okay. No, but nobody knows where they're buried.
We don't know where they're buried.
Interesting. But they are buried on cemetery property.
Yeah, now see, the cemetery started as 17 acres. But then another, I don't know how many acres were added.
So what we see as cemetery today...
It's not the edge anymore.
Right.
Their edge is not our edge.
Yeah.
So there's one theory that they're pretty close to John Burns.
Okay.
He would like that.
Oh, my God.
It's actually marked on a map that Dr. Stewart, Henry Stewart, was a local historian. And he marked them. And that's where it looks like they are.
Okay, so they're somewhere in that area.
Maybe.
And is that area full? Are they not burying people in that area
What
anymore?
area now are we talking?
John Burns, his area.
There are some people they sell the plots back. They inherit plots, and they turn them back.
Yeah.
So there are. I don't know if there's any left in the old section anymore, but for a while, that there were some. You'd have to talk to the superintendent to find out.
Okay.
There's also a Confederate. We know for sure. His name is Milas Wilson. He's in Area G, I think. That's my area. That's where I'm going to be. Not too far away from my spot. Milas Wilson was 17, and he was in Scales Brigade. And the first day, they were really wiped out attacking the last stand at the seminary of the Iron Brigade and some of the other units. And he ran away. He deserted.
Did he go north of town to a farm or something?
Some people think that he was the young boy that went to the Baileys. And Mrs. Bailey gave him some clothes of her son to wear.
Yeah.
And he married a Gettysburg girl and stayed the rest of his life in Gettysburg. So he's a Confederate, but a deserter. That's the way he's listed in their records anyway. Those are the 3 I know for sure.
How about the other question he has is, after the battle, how was the rebuilding / rehabilitation of the cemetery financed?
Well, it's the way it's always been financed, by selling lots, burying, because there's a fee, to bury you there, and donations. And that's the way it came in. There were people, when the cemetery was first established, that bought shares, bought shares in the association. Not stock, but that's the term they used. So, but you see, there wasn't a whole lot of damage. And you got to remember that if your fence was around your plot, you've got to repair it.
Right.
If your stone was damaged, you've got to repair it or not repair it. So the cemetery, now the gatehouse is another matter. Windows were broken in the gatehouse, and Mrs. Thorne lost a lot of property. When she went down the Baltimore Pike, her son, I think, maybe her oldest son, saw some of their furniture being carried down the road by some Union soldiers.
Yeah.
So she put in a claim, a personal claim. It was not the cemetery.
Right.
$395 she figured that she lost. And she was paid by the government $41.50. So they never got what they thought they should have got.
Terrible. It's terrible.
But she was not acting on the part of the Evergreen Cemetery.
Right. But now, how much damage was done to the gatehouse? Besides the broken windows?
Not a whole lot.
Really?
No.
Didn't take any shells or anything?
No, there's one spot, if you look at the archway, upper part on the south side.
Okay.
It looks like there's some damage. But I've talked to Brian Kennel, and he said that it was water damage.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. And the photograph, you can definitely see it, especially if you get that digitized one. You can really blow into it. You know? But there was a shell that actually went into Mrs. Thorne's bedroom. Broke the window, went inside, didn't explode. I think she was gone. She was probably gone by that time, because it probably happened on July 2nd.
So it went through the window itself and didn't leave any lasting damage. Okay, Veronica Bristensky Esquire writes us, is the current location of the soldiers' burial section the original location where the Gettysburg battle dead were buried?
Yes.
Okay. And were those graves that Elizabeth... Yes, those are the graves that Elizabeth Thorne dug, right?
Well, there's 71 stones in there. Now, one is a brother of one of the soldiers that she did bury. He died in 1864. Hawes Shop in Virginia. So his parents...
I've seen that one, yes.
Yeah, the Greenlee brothers.
Yeah.
His parents wanted him buried next to his brother. So he's not a Gettysburg battle dead. And then there was one or two of those 10th New York, it is cavalry, came to me.
Yeah.
They're buried in there.
Okay.
So if you take 3 away from 71, there's 68 left that she buried. Because there were some people who said, well, now that the national cemeteries, we want them dug up and moved over there.
Mm-hmm.
You got to realize that some people didn't want that to happen, because that was new. National cemeteries were new. And it was like buried for free. That's potter's field, you know. That's
like a pauper.
Pauper, yeah. So they never had them removed.
Interesting, huh? And now everybody wants the federal government to take care of everything for us, cradle to grave. So
yeah, I guess.
How far we've fallen. Okay, well, so. All right. So, can you explain how arrangements for Confederate soldiers that are buried there were made? Kind of touched on that, but she's a little bit more specific. So, well, actually, no, because the Confederate soldiers we know are buried there are still there.
They're still there.
They're still there. We just don't know exactly where.
Unmarked.
Someday, somebody's going to find them.
Well, you know what? I wonder. This is my sneaky suspicion.
Okay.
But nobody will admit this. You don't want to dig where they're buried with a new grave. So I'm thinking Peter Thorne told the next superintendent where they were.
Okay.
And then secretively, he told the next one. And he told the next.
Down.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes it cooler.
Cannot prove it.
That makes it cooler, though. It makes it like a movie, you know. It's like this super secret, kind of like the Da Vinci Code or something. Like this small cabal of people know and have known through the generations. Roy Mead, he says, "Hi, Matt and Deb. My question is, did the Evergreen Cemetery submit a damage claim after the battle, and if so, did the government pay any of it?" So Elizabeth Thorne submitted it on behalf of herself. Did the cemetery?
David McConaughey did not. And he ran a little like, they wouldn't be called spies, the couriers, you know. He had a group of people, so he was kind of working with the U.S., the Union armies. And I think he did say something. Mrs. Thorne was interviewed by a reporter from one of the Gettysburg papers, I guess. And she mentioned that she put in a claim for these damages.
Okay.
And David McConaughey didn't like that. And let Mrs. Thorne know that. Because as she was superintendent in the place of her husband, who's out the war, she's representing the cemetery.
Right.
Just as, you know, our current superintendent is. They can have their own opinions, but you are the person in between, the person who's buying a plot, you know.
Yeah.
And so David McConaughey was very patriotic, and he would think it would be unpatriotic to put in a claim for any damages on the part of the cemetery, most likely. That's just an educated guess.
But probably also if he wants to kind of expand for a national cemetery, doing so would kind of rock the boat and not really work in his favor.
Could be that too.
Okay. See, yeah, smart guy. Don Wren wants to know, is Abraham Bryan buried in the Evergreen Cemetery? If not, Where in Gettysburg is he buried? Also, are there any African Americans buried in Evergreen Cemetery? That's a good question.
Colonel Wren, I know you.
Oh.
I had him on a tour some years ago and many times since. And coming up in this July, he'll be back. Abraham Bryan is not buried in Evergreen Cemetery. He is buried in Lincoln Cemetery, which is off Long Lane near the Rec Park.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember the year he died, but that cemetery was established, I think it was 1867.
Okay.
Lincoln Cemetery. So it's between
that sounds right.
Washington and Long Lane. There's still an active cemetery. Now, there are people of African American descent in Evergreen. Evergreen was never a segregated cemetery. You know, it could be any religion, it could be any race. And I know some African Americans who are buried in Evergreen.
Personally, you mean?
I knew them.
You knew them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or I know their family now.
Right. Okay.
So I'm not going to mention any names.
Sure. No. But, 1867. I just looked it up.
It's 67?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good
I haven't
call.
thought about that year for a while.
Lincoln Cemetery is a pretty cool cemetery. It's hard to actually get into it.
Yes.
But you can go to the fence and look in, and you can see like Basil Biggs.
Yes.
Do you say Basil or Basil?
Basil.
That's what I say. I always ask people, do you say Basil or Basil? Because I hear some people say Basil, some people say Basil.
I think either is okay.
Yeah, exactly.
One's
It depends on where you're from.
One's an herb, though, isn't it?
Yes, that's true. But you can see many famous African American names from the battle, or from the town's history,
Right.
the battle history, and everything.
About 200 African Americans lived in Gettysburg out of the 2,400.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, Spencer Frogner. He says, "Hey, Addressing Gettysburg gang. My question this time around pertains to the story of Elizabeth Thorne. Are any of the soldier graves that she dug shortly after the battle remain in, yes, okay, we did that one. Let's see, okay, here he's got a side question because we covered the Elizabeth Thorne stuff. What would you say is one of the most interesting grave sites aside from Jenny Wade?"
Wow, that's a tough one because, I believe as I do these walks sometimes in that cemetery that these are my friends. You can kind of get to know them.
Yeah.
But if I had to choose, I think it's the Powers plot. Solomon Powers. He owned Powers Hill at one time. He was a stone cutter. He had 6 daughters, all of them in their 20s, I guess, acted as nurses after the battle, at his house on High Street. And like when I was a kid, one of the first books that I bought was the Human Interest Stories.
Right.
There was a picture of these five sisters.
Okay.
Okay? And they look pretty old. Well, probably the picture was taken when they were maybe near 50 years old.
Okay.
Because they were much older. Because they were in their 20s.
Okay.
I think they were all school teachers. And then I found out, doing some research just a couple of years ago, that there was the oldest Powers sister. Her name was Cynthia. Now, she was married to a pit and turf. And she was 6 months pregnant or something like that at the time of the battle, and she's down in the basement of their house, and it's damp, and they say, got a lung ailment.
Okay.
Maybe from this. And she died in early 1864. She's buried in Evergreen, and on her stone it just says Cynthia. It's near the Solomon Powers plot. And I think it's 4 of the other sisters are buried there. There's one I can't find. And it's a bucket list that I find Virginia Powers Smith. If anybody knows where Virginia Powers Smith is buried, please let me know. I have one clue that it might be in Baltimore. And Solomon Powers, of course, is there. And that's where that Alan Fraser stone is. the 14-year-old that was accidentally killed when the shell exploded. And
well, tell the story about that boy so that people listening know what we've alluded to twice.
Okay. He was, I don't know if he was actually adopted by Solomon Powers, but he was living there on West High Street.
I was under the impression that he was their boy, like a hired.
Well, Solomon Powers did get apprentice.
That's yeah.
And so anyway, he was there, and this man from Philadelphia who came to be at the ceremony when Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address had picked up a shell. And he was banging it on the stone yard.
Why would you do that?
I don't know, but somebody was yelling at him, "Don't do that."
Yeah.
Allen was nearby. It exploded. It was unexploded, but it was still dangerous. So his hands were mangled. I think an eye was hit out by a piece of shell. But Allen was nearly cut in two.
Wow.
Yeah. So
the man who was holding it just had some minor...
He survived.
Yeah.
They weren't quite minor because maybe his hands were amputated. He spent the rest of his life in like old age home or a home for the blind.
Well, minor compared to being cut in half, I guess.
Yes.
But so the boy was cut in half.
He was killed. He was killed outright. So he finally got his stone last November.
But the Powers is they buried him.
Yeah.
But they just never got a stone.
Right. Well, like I said, probably Powers bought 10 plots.
Okay.
Because his daughters are buried in that section with their husbands.
Okay.
And I really was excited about Jane Powers. Now, she was married at the time of the battle, and she lived on near the Seminary Ridge near the Armory. Someplace between there and the Macmillan House. But she taught in the Butt School out the Fairfield Road.
Okay.
Another mile and a half or so out the Fairfield Road.
Yeah. Is that by the Butts Farm?
Butts Farm is in the back.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a little old country schoolhouse. Brick,
is it still there?
White, still there.
Oh, cool.
And it's my home.
Oh, you live in it?
I live there.
No kidding.
I bought it in 1988.
I've always liked the idea of living in a home that isn't built to be a home, like a schoolhouse, or a barn or something like that. That's so cool.
It was.
Oh, man. Okay, cool.
So that's probably not the ones, but there are others that I like too.
I just had a question now. How do they, in the olden days, did they bury them one on top, like a husband and wife? Would they be one on top of the other, or would they be next?
I think they were side by side.
Side by side. Okay.
Sometimes in national cemeteries, they have to be vertical.
Right.
Because of space.
Because they're more they're more geometric the way those are set up, right? Like you don't have the space to go side by side.
Right.
But in the old cemeteries, they would do them side by side. So those are pretty big plots, right? I mean, like a family plot is a pretty huge piece of real estate there. I like the Kendall-Hart one. I don't know why. David Kendall-Hart.
Yeah, I know where he is.
Yeah, I like Kendall-Hart. I like I don't like Jenny Wade, but I like the poor little soldier right next to her who's getting all
Uncle Thaddeus.
Yeah, he's all he's got this little crunched in. Yeah. She's kind of like pushing him out. There's I like James Gaddis monument. That's pretty cool too. And there's another one I can't remember the name of though, but it's a really ornate obelisk type thing. It's over on the south rim of the hill, right before you start going down. Oh God, I can't think of the name. But anyway, those are some of my favorite ones. You got it?
Yeah, I like the, it's a reverend. He's buried like right next to the chapel, and I cannot for the life of me remember his name now. But he was a first sergeant in the 148th PA. He was wounded here. I think he ended up being, he was commissioned as an officer, got out of the Army, went to a Lutheran seminary up by Selinsgrove, came back here, ended up marrying the daughter of, and oh my God, I can't remember the names now. The daughter of the guy who ran the Lutheran seminary here, finished up his degree here. No, not Schmucker. Maybe a Jacobs. Maybe an Eister. I can't remember.
Jacobs is in there. Has a red obelisk near the brown mausoleum.
Yeah.
Circle.
Yeah. So his daughter.
His daughter was Julia and married a missionary.
Yes.
Went to India.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. And I cannot remember his name for the life of me.
Harpster.
Yes. John Henry Harpster. Yeah. I like that one.
Is that the one that I'm thinking of? The one,
no,
you know which one I'm talking about? Because we went past it one time, and I remarked.
It's a real big one. The one
Yes.
you're talking about. This one's like a regular headstone, and I just like his story.
Yeah,
because he ended up spending like the better part of a decade as a Lutheran seminary in India.
Yes,
like during the British Raj. Yeah,
Right.
we went and found that one too, if I recall, because I've heard that story. So it must have been right.
Yeah,
we went to that.
That's a neat one to me.
It is really cool to go walking through there. I think everybody that when you come down here, especially if you read a lot of books about the battle and you catch these names of the civilians and stuff like that, you need to go to the cemetery and just go and see, just casually walk around and just see what names you recognize, and then go over and look at them. And I don't know, it really is fascinating.
It's like going to Hollywood and getting a map of the Stars house.
Yeah.
But
no, this is where Errol Flynn lived.
And they legitimately have a map of the stars in Evergreen Cemetery. You can get one at the gatehouse.
Yeah.
That's neat.
Yeah. It is pretty cool. Let's see here. So Mike Kearns, we kind of touched on this before. You alluded to this. Jenny Wade's grave is often mentioned as being on or near the site of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. If this is true, was her grave relocated to the spot in Evergreen Cemetery for this reason, or is it just easier to use her statue as a reference point? It's so interesting how people think history goes. I never even would have thought of that, but that's an interesting way to look at it. What is the story of Jenny Wade's grave? And
okay, when she was killed, which was on July 3rd, the last day of the battle, she was buried the next day, the 4th of July, in the garden behind her sister's home. Mm-hmm. And it was her sister's 22nd birthday.
Happy birthday.
She had to bury her sister. And she was there, buried in that garden, with the dough still under her fingertips when she was making the bread, the story goes, until January 1864. So from July to January. And then she was moved to the German Reformed Cemetery in town. It would be on South Stratton Street. The German Reformed Church is now the United Church of Christ at Stratton and East High Street. So there's houses there now.
There's like an old Sears and Roebuck house, I think, right in the corner there.
Right?
That White House.
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
I forget. I can't remember who was telling me that, but it was one of these people who's like really into the town history.
Cool.
Yeah,
it was one where I grew up.
Yeah,
my dad told me about.
I had never heard of him until that, and then
that's
I was
cool.
like, I didn't know there was a thing.
I'm glad the alarm clock went off this morning. Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome. And then also for those of you listening, if you know where the Borough Hall is, that would be that area there as well.
So they moved her from there in November 1865 to where she is now.
Okay.
That would be her third grave. Now, that's not her original tombstone.
Right.
She had a normal, I've seen a picture of it, but her sister, who owned the house where she was killed, moved to Iowa, and she talked about Jenny, I guess. And so these Women's Relief Corps of Iowa paid for that monument, and that's Carrara marble. It's over $1,200 of the woman holding canteens.
Yeah.
You know who used Carrara marble, don't you?
No.
Michelangelo.
Oh, so it's fancy stuff.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. So
you can tell too. I mean, you when you go and you look up close, you can see that it's a little better quality than the other things in there.
Right. So that Thaddeus Philby, her uncle, that would be her mother's brother. He was wounded in June 1864 at Petersburg, and he was discharged. I guess they tried to get him well to go back into the military, but he came home 6 months later. So he will die at Gettysburg 3 months after that. So who was there first, I was trying to figure that out.
Right.
Because, you see, the Wades, her and Jenny's mom and dad are buried in that, but there's 4 graves, and they had to buy 5 plots. See? Mm-hmm. And I know Jenny's mom died after her, 18... I don't know, it's so many years in my mind. The father died first, James Wade, and then the mother, but then they moved Jenny there, so I'm not positive about who got in there first.
With her or the uncle, you're saying?
Yeah, it was either who was put into that ground first. If he died
in
9 months after June 64.
Uh-huh. And
she was buried there in November 65. So Thaddeus, the uncle, was there first.
Yeah. And then...
So why did they choose that place for him? It wasn't because we didn't even know, of course, where the Gettysburg Address was until people started, like Bill Frazanito, studying that photograph you were talking about.
Before Bill Frazanito started doing that, what was the assumed place?
The assumed place when I started guiding in the mid-'70s was the Soldiers' National Monument.
You said that before.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the Soldiers' National Monument. And I think I recall when I started coming here, I think if I went on a tour that had an older guide, that's what they would say. And I always remember just thinking that was the place. Mm-hmm. And then it wasn't until... just a couple of years ago, I think I was doing, it was a ranger walk with Matt Atkinson about the cemetery. And he was saying that, now they believe it was further over up on the top of the hill in about the center of the Evergreen Cemetery, And I had never heard that before. Because at that point, I hadn't gotten Bill's book yet.
Well, Bill's book, where he went into this, says 1995.
Yeah.
So you should get that book.
So, no, I got it now, back home.
Okay.
But yeah, but at the time I didn't have it.
Okay.
Don't tell anybody.
Okay. There's so
I know
many,
that's like sacrilege.
so many books.
There are so many books. There's only so many dollars, Like
that's right. And
you got to choose.
Space
and space. Yes, I'm running out of space and dollars. So, okay, we got one more here from one of our Facebook viewers. And ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching on Facebook now and you want to get a question in, you got a couple of minutes left. So go ahead and get it in. Make it good. Bill Etzkorn wants to know, John Burns, Jenny Wade, Elizabeth Thorne are definitely icons of the battle. Is there anyone else as iconic buried in the cemetery? Maybe not even someone related to the battle, but just someone of note. Mm-hmm.
We have Oscar Shaw. He was song and dance guy, like Broadway plays.
Okay.
Vaudeville. And
entertainment guy.
He was in a famous movie with the Marx Brothers. What was that called?
Night at the Opera?
No.
That's the only one I know.
When you get to be a certain age, you can have senior moments. But anyway, he was an actor too.
Okay.
In the days, talkies even. Mm-hmm. So we have him. We have Marianne Moore, who was a poetess, I guess you have to say. She won the Pulitzer Prize in 1953. For her poetry. She was very different with her kind of poems. I've read some of them.
Okay.
Here's a funny story. The Ford people, she was pretty famous in the 50s, so they asked her for ideas of what they could call this new car they were coming out with. So she came up with, like 20 different names. Utopian Turtle Top, Mongoose Civic, and that's spelled not like our Civic car.
Okay.
Is Q-U-E on the end.
Okay.
They didn't like any of hers.
Yeah.
They called the car the Edsel.
Oh.
You know about the Edsel?
Oh, yeah, I've heard about the Edsel, yes.
It was a flop, I guess. Maybe it's a collector's item now.
I bet it is. Like the DeLorean.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
She wore a tri-corner hat like a Revolutionary War. She was different. But she's on an American stamp, postage stamp, 25-cent stamp or something. It was a while ago.
What was her name again?
Marianne Moore.
Marianne Moore, okay.
Her parents are buried in Evergreen, and her cremains were brought here in 1972. That's when she passed away. We have Samuel Cobean. Do you like to look at cartoons, like comics in the newspaper?
When I was a kid, I would. Yeah, but that's the only section I would read.
Sometimes when you see the character, there's little bubbles, and like what he's thinking.
The thought bubbles.
Samuel Cobean invented them.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, is this Cobean
Yorker.
of Cobean's Hill? And,
Yes, the family.
Okay, so he invented
he's
the thought bubble.
International cartoonist. But being from Western Pennsylvania, I have to mention we have a Pittsburgh Steeler buried in Evergreen.
Okay.
His name was Stephen Corson, and I can't remember his position that he played for the Steelers. But he was killed tragically. He was cutting down a tree. He lived in Western Pennsylvania, up in the mountains. And he was cutting a big tree down, and the tree was starting to fall the wrong way, and his dog was there. He was trying to save his dog.
Amen.
And it came down on him.
Oh, good.
And killed him.
Jeez, at least the dog got away.
The dog got away. But that's how he was killed. But he went to Gettysburg High School. I don't know if they still have it, but they had his high school football jersey in one of the display trophy cases.
Wow.
Stephen Corson.
And so, but he wasn't living here, I'm guessing, or does that
Well, he grew up here. After his high school years, he moved away.
Okay. What about Charlie Weaver? Where was he buried?
Charlie Weaver is not in Evergreen. You'd think he would have wanted to because he loved Gettysburg so
that's
much.
what I don't understand. Talk about Charlie Weaver so people know who that is.
He had a museum on Baltimore Street on the north slope of Cemetery Hill. He had these little dioramas.
Yeah.
And it was the old orphanage that was started right after the battle for the, you were considered an orphan if your father died. Your mother could still be alive.
Right.
But since they weren't the breadwinners, the man was, he bought that. And he had this little museum there.
And he used to go on the Tonight Show, and what did he do?
And you know what he did? Hollywood Squares.
That's right.
And he knew his history all the time.
And what did he do when he went on the Tonight Show? Would he sell a piece of the battlefield or something?
He promoted the Gettysburg Battlefield Preservation Association. In fact, in my first school where I taught, we bought a square inch or foot or something like that.
Yeah.
We raised the money and we sent it to him. He was involved with that preservation group.
Now, Charlie Weaver's real name was Cliff Arquette.
Right.
And what I like about this most is that his grandchildren are Rosanna Arquette and David Arquette, the actors.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. And they used to, in fact, I was listening to Gilbert Gottfried. You know him, the comedian? Mm-hmm. Gilbert Gottfried's Amazing Colossal Podcast. He has one. And he interviews all these old Hollywood people and young Hollywood, but it's really fascinating. You wouldn't know it because he's got such this reputation as being this really crude comic, but he loves Hollywood trivia and history. So Rosanna Arquette was on a year or two ago, and she talked about coming to Gettysburg to visit her grandfather, Cliff Arquette, but she also called him Charlie Weaver, and see his little museum, and they would spend, I don't know how long, but they would come here during the summer. And I always found Rosanna Arquette strangely attractive. I always had a crush on her as a young man, so I was like, wow, Rosanna Arquette was in Gettysburg. Abraham Lincoln was here, all these other people, but Rosanna Arquette was in Gettysburg. So she's related to Charlie Weaver.
Okay.
Okay, that I think Duck Soup? Was it Duck Soup that guy was in?
No.
Was it A Night in Casablanca?
I remember.
A Day at the Races.
A Day at the Races. No,
At the Circus. The Marx Brothers Go West.
You should know all your marks. Here you go.
Now you're reaching.
Here it is.
I'm going through the list.
The Coconuts.
The coconuts. That's not even on this list.
It's not?
No.
Because it's kind of famous.
The Coconuts.
As a 1929, so it was one of the first talkies.
Okay.
After the jazz singer.
No, it's not on here.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's him right there.
Okay, and his name again was what?
Oscar
Shaw. Okay.
He had a summer home here, but he married a local gal. But he would come here up on Keckler's Hill. That's where he lived. I think he had one of the first in the ground swimming.
Oh, fancy.
In the area, too, because he was making some money.
Sure.
As an actor.
It is an interesting area for people to have like summer homes and things like that. It's really nice, and you have the mountains not too far away. It's a great area, but we don't want the word to get out because we don't want people moving here and overpopulating it.
Okay.
So let's just keep that between all of us. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I don't see any more questions in Facebook, but if you are still watching on Facebook, hang around a little bit after we stop the show and we'll talk to you a bit. But for those of you listening on the podcast, thank you. Thank you to our patrons for sending in the questions. Thank you, Deb, for coming on finally. It was great having you. And by the way, one of our viewers now says, Deb is a wonderful guest. I hope you have her back again soon. And I do too. I hope you'll come back and we'll talk about whatever you want, really. It doesn't matter. That's about it. Thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you next time.
Our hearts so stout have got us fame, for soon 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Gary Owen in glory. Instead of spa, we'll drink down ale and hay.